Welcome to season 2 of the Happy Sensory Corner podcast. At Mendability, we want to help everyone, especially when they are vulnerable, to feel happier, more comfortable in their skin, more confident, so they can be their true selves. We can all journey together through life more happily. Our contribution is to work on brain health. As our brains grow stronger and healthier, all of us benefit, but especially those among us who struggle to sleep or overwhelmed by the barrage of information from the environment, who struggle with their bodies, with abstractions, etc. And so we developed a program that boosts brain development, activates the brain's self-healing mechanisms with short hands-on games based on the neuroscience field of environmental enrichment, and we call it sensory enrichment. And so we're experts in boosting brain development, but we are not experts in everything. For example, we're not experts in what to eat, physical activity, advocacy, education, job training, recreation. Today, I'm very excited to introduce you to Amethysta Herrick. She had a fascinating journey through many fields: genetics, chemistry, software engineering, executive management, but she says the greatest challenge she's taken on is addressing the pervasive fallacy that gender and identity are only relevant to the LGBT community. She uses her personal transgender experience, along with her background in science, to show that these are human issues everyone faces. Amethysta is passionate about promoting the essential quality of all people, and through her writing and speaking, she explores identity, gender theory, feminism. One thing I love is that she transforms complicated ideas into stories, making her audience not only understand, but feel her message. She's also been known to play a 35-year-old Fender Stratocaster when she's not advocating for human rights. I'm excited to explore how she brings these stories and science together. Amethyst, thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you, Kim, for the invitation.
I'm looking forward to the beginning. You and I talked about sharing your screen as you share a story. I think that story is perfect to get the episode started and start
Okay.
discussing our issues. Do you I'll let you take control of the screen and share and um, share your story.
All right. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right. So what this is a story about a little girl who grew up. Because you see, back in the olden days, which was definitely after Woodstock ended, but long before Star Wars was ever in theaters, a baby girl was born. And what was strange about this baby girl is that her parents weren't even aware she was born. And that wasn't because her mother was completely unconscious or her father had gotten lost somewhere in Siberia. It was because a doctor looked at the baby girl's anatomy when she was born. And from the anatomy, the doctor made a decision about the baby girl's identity that would make the rest of her life very difficult. The doctor typed a single letter M on the little girl's birth certificate. And I know that doesn't sound like much because it wasn't even the letter itself that made the baby girl's life difficult. It was everything else that comes along with the letter M, because the baby girl knew she was a girl, but that letter M made her parents, her community, her government think she was a boy. And that girl, she wanted to play Barbies with the other girls. She was told those types of things weren't for her. And from that, she learned she wasn't good enough for the things girls do. But when she tried to do the things that people said she was supposed to do, she wasn't any good at those either. Nobody wanted to play with her. And from that, she learned she wasn't good enough for the things boys do either. And it didn't help that her father was abusive and her mother was distant, because from everything, the girl learned she really wasn't good for anything. So the girl wasn't very happy. And then she reached puberty. She learned about the things that growing humans are supposed to know, but her body changed and it looked wrong. It felt wrong. Everything was wrong. And as hard as she could, no matter how she tried, it just felt wrong. And she wanted to hurt herself because that alone seemed right. And so she tried to end it several times, actually. But there was one thing that kept the girl going, and that was learning how things worked. So she applied herself in school, and she did to ignore the people who called her a boy, and she was successful. Well, kind of successful. And when the girl finished school and found a job, she made money. But she found if she would just agree with those people who insisted on calling her a boy, she could make much more money. So she agreed. And the man she became buried that girl deep inside, where nobody could find her, not even himself. But then the man found out he was going to be a father. He was going to have his own baby, and that baby was a boy. So the man didn't know what he was going to do, but he did know one thing, and he knew that he still didn't understand boys. And when his son was born, he was going to bury that little girl inside even deeper, because boys need fathers. Fathers are men. Fathers are not little girls. And as he tried so hard to forget about that little girl, the man slowly died inside. That is, until he was so broken that he couldn't go on. And then his family reminded him about the little girl that still peeked out occasionally. His family reminded him that little girl needed love. They reminded him they wanted to love her. And so the dying man set her free. And that baby girl became everything she was ever supposed to become. That baby girl, of course, was me. And that's my story. I hope that was good.
Thank you for sharing, Amethysta.
Sure,
It,
I got a little emotional.
well, I think all of us did. And I think that's a beautiful way of starting the discussion, the episode, because I think this is an issue, like you say, it's an issue for everyone. Um, I'd like to take a step back, or maybe uh, you've had an unusual journey through your various professions. You know, you've done genetics, chemistry, software engineer. Tell us a little bit about that career. How did that go? You talked, you mentioned it in your story, but um, uh, I want to talk about the science of sex and gender a little bit, and I think it'll make a lot of sense if we understand where you're coming from that perspective.
Mm-hmm. So when I was very young, I mean, in that story, that little girl wanted to know everything she could about the universe, and in particular about herself, because I'm going to stop using the third person. I thought that I was wrong, that there was something wrong with me. In fact, I was kind of told that there were things wrong with me. And so what I wanted to do was learn as much about the universe so that I could fix it, fix what was wrong with me. And one of the things that I learned very early, so in the early 1980s or so, I started learning about genetics. I mean, I was pretty young, but I was learning about genetics because the idea at the time was that genetics defined who we were. And so I wanted to become a molecular biologist because if I did, I thought maybe I could engineer a better human being, or at the very least make myself better so that other people would take me differently, so that I would have a better life. So I started off as an undergraduate in molecular biology, so especially genetics. That was my focus. I did end up moving over into chemistry. I finished a PhD in analytical chemistry in 1998. And part of the reason why I did analytical chemistry was it focused on data analysis, it focused on experimental design. How do we look at the data that we get and make sure that it supports the conclusion we're going to make? Checking to see that the experiment's actually going to answer the questions.
So,
Now,
so,
actually,
so
go
what
ahead.
I'm hearing is you went into the study of study.
Ultimately, yes.
It's like how, so I got all those questions, all those question marks. What is the best scientific method to to get the answer? Is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that
yes.
what is the most surprising thing you have learned in that in the learning of learning or the study of study?
Ooh, that's a fascinating question and something I keep returning to because I think the biggest lesson I learned from graduate school was not about chemistry. It was that as a field, as a like a a whole paradigm, science knows so little, and that it's important for us not to believe that we have all the facts, but that we continue to ask the questions, because that's really what science is about. It's not a collection of just this is true, this is true, this is false, but rather, hey, why is this false? And can we, if we find data that we think should be true but turns out to be false, what's wrong with our theory? I
Was
think
it
that's the biggest.
Einstein who said, "The more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know"?
I think it was Socrates, but yeah, exactly. The I forget
Wait, I'm
exactly
gonna
how it
Google
goes,
this
but
while you talk.
yeah.
Give me a second.
But I think
Quotes on knowing. Oh, here you go. Socrates. The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing.
yes, there we
Yes,
go.
there we go.
I I remember that very well because of course I got it from the highly philosophical movie Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. So, Socrates is in that. So, I mean truth, but anyway, I think that's the biggest lesson I learned both as an undergraduate and as a graduate student. Um, Honestly, I went into software because it was expedient. I didn't want to have to do a bunch more school, but I also have that kind of mind that sees a very big picture, and that served me exceptionally well in software. The ability to see to generalize a problem so that you can make a solution that satisfies a lot of situations, a lot of scenarios. And that's kind of the way my mind works.
Hang on a second. So you've got these deep, deep it's got this deep drive to find answers and to find the way to find answers. You do a PhD that basically tells you the scientific method is a pretty okay scientific method, but in a process I've learned there's so little that we actually know, and there's so many questions that we're trying. And instead of saying, and then you kind of stopped. Why did you stop and start looking at building solutions rather than looking for ways to answer questions? This it feels like a big jump. Did something happen? Did somebody say something? Did somebody do something?
Through It's a complicated question. It's a complicated answer. When when I was finishing up graduate school and I was looking at what else I was going to be able to do, I realized that I was going to have to make certain concessions to go out into the working world. One of those major concessions was agree that I am the person that the world wants me to be, that I assumed the world wanted me to be. And after a fashion, I gave up. It was easier just to do that because I could make a bunch of money. And what I was being taught was that money was everything. Money was the road to power. Money was the road to identity. Money is who you should be. And I gave up on believing who I was and believed ultimately what I'm calling the American dream, that we are what we own, we are how much money we make. I don't agree with that anymore, but that was really what
So
happened.
it wasn't a step forward, it was more of a step backward going into software engineering in terms of your
Yes.
quest.
Oh, certainly in terms of my quest. Yes. There
Did
were,
the world of software engineering um, contribute to where you're? I mean, of course it did. You are to the who person you are today because of the experience that preceded that. But did it? Did you have a positive experience as a software engineer that you can think back on?
ultimately, yes. Um, what I did as a scientist, I think, was again look at things from a very holistic viewpoint. And part of why I wanted to do analytical chemistry was exactly how do you design an experiment that's going to test what you want to test? How do you acquire the data? Is the data good? When I went into software, again, it was looking at things from a holistic viewpoint. They were totally different problems, but I think it's a similar process. If I can say that, you use the scientific method in software, I mean, I think that's accurate. We,
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I did a little bit of coding in my day, and the computer will not do anything that you haven't told it to.
right,
It's a very it's an interesting process because the computer has no assumptions, no preconceived ideas, no will of its own. It's not going to start,
right,
okay, well, I'm bored. You haven't told me to do anything, so I'm going to start doing something else, and I'm going to think my thoughts. It will only think what you tell it to think, only do what you tell it to do.
yes,
I That must be a an interesting and so this is, you know, I could just it's fun. I'm thinking out loud here, and the audience are getting bored with us just theorizing, but I'm having a ball and geeking out, and there you go. Um, but I'm seeing the overlap, the fighting the world's assumptions by working on growing parts of the world that do not have any.
yes,
It's
yeah. You brought up the computer will only do what you tell it to do. Great point. Nature, the universe, how about if I say the universe has no concern over what we want it to do. We can try to direct it in ways that we choose, that we hope it will go. But if we don't if we don't understand the rules within the universe, we're not going to do anything. I think it was Sir Francis Bacon, if I remember correctly, who said, "Nature, in order to be commanded, must be obeyed." And see, look at this. We're pulling out all kinds of great quotes. We've got Socrates, Francis Bacon. So I don't, I didn't see going into software as a complete negation of everything that I was trying to do. Again, I saw it as sort of giving up on myself and just allowing the world to occur. What the world was going to do, it was going to do. But I did end up getting into management. I have that because I think in a holistic way. I don't have the ability not to make contributions. And so at some point somebody said, "Oh, why don't you be a leader?" And I went, "Oh, I kind of don't want to be." But ultimately, I ended up in executive management in a couple of companies, software companies, and that taught me a lot about people. And that was interesting too, because remember, I started off thinking going into the field, going into software, giving up and thinking, I have to be the person that the world wants me to be. As a manager, I was able to dispel that belief, not only in myself, but in people I managed, because they thought that they were not supposed to be the people that they are. They knew they were. So ultimately, I think all of this contributed to when I started transitioning gender in 2022 and started writing, because I did started doing research on myself. I had this background now to look at the genetics, to run my own research, as well as to talk to humans and connect with them and understand their stories. And I think it's all
So,
through stories that we learn.
yes, yes, yes. Except for me, maybe. I don't know. Do you do you remember the Mac versus PC ads where you
Oh
had the
yeah.
Mac who was this cool, suave people person, and then you have the PC, okay, who was the geek, nerd, computer spread. I've been Mac all my life, but I think like a PC. Like
Mm.
I geek out with spreadsheets. I love data. I love pie charts. I love to be able to boil things down, but I don't have the skills you do to know which questions to ask the spreadsheet. Because numbers will not lie, but you can see anything you want in numbers. You just have
You
to
can.
just do a couple of things, and all of a sudden, ooh, you're twice as likely to die tomorrow.
Right, right,
Right?
right.
Um, so your background in research and in the research of research and then in storytelling is the perfect mix. So you and I, when we were prepared for this podcast, we were thinking about what analogy we could use to introduce people to this idea, to understanding better that there's a lot we
Yeah.
don't know about sex and gender. And I don't know if it was you or me, it doesn't matter, but we came up with this idea of comparing the number of genes that impact your eye with the number of genes that impact your sex. Where do you want
Right.
to go with this? Where do you want to start? What do you want to explain?
Oh my gosh. Because there's a lot of places to go. Genetics, first of all, is a very imprecise, I don't even want to, not field, but in practice, genetics is very, very imprecise. And in Western society, at the very least, we think, oh, sure, genetics will not, cannot lie. And the thing is that genetics really often does lie, at least in terms of what we think about, like how we want to use genetics. When you think about eye color, I mean, I don't know the exact number of genes. I would take the guess at maybe 50 to 100
Well, I
max.
looked it up. Well,
Oh,
I
did
looked
you?
it up.
Good.
I asked my buddy Chad Gupta,
Right.
and he came up with number 16 that
16.
affect eye color.
Okay.
And I really had to squeeze because he said, well, there's this gene and this gene and this gene. So he came up with four. I was like, well, tell me about maybe others. So I hope, I don't know. Um, how do you feel about that number?
16, I feel okay. So the human genome has a total of, there's debate on it, believe it or not, between 20,000 and 30,000 genes total. And that defines everything about every human. I should say it like this. There are between 20 and 30,000 genes in the reference genome, the standard reference genome. And so that's like the generic human. If you were going to put like a blue and white label on something that said human, 20 to 30,000 genes. So 16 of those define eye color. That's interesting because as far as what determines what's going to, how do I want to put this without going into a ton of biochemistry? The rest of that is essentially biochemistry out of 20,000. And biochemistry is what ends up determining the reproductive parts that you get. It's not necessarily, we think of XX and XY, but it is not that simple. There is essentially one gene on the Y chromosome that will create a protein that stimulates the mother that could make male reproductive parts. But that's a long causal chain. You have to have the gene, you have to make the protein, you have to irritate the mother. The mother has to be sufficiently sensitive to it. The embryo has to be sufficiently sensitive to testosterone. It's a long causal chain. And for that matter, we've
It's
actually
funny
seen
because you're
that
making it
gene.
sound like to end up with male reproductive parts is a long as a small chance of that of all the things that need to happen, but it's nature is 50-50.
No, actually, if you look
I
it
know.
up,
As
that's
it was
chat's
coming out, I
movement.
was like, okay, I'm stepping on stuff that we're not ready to tread on yet.
Well,
Let me back away. Continue your continue your explanation. So 20,000 genes.
yeah. So there are, I mean, we know that there is one gene, and it is called the SRY gene, the sex determining region of the Y chromosome. If there's one thing biologists don't do well, it's nomenclature. This is sort of in science. Like we could have come up with a snazzy word for it, but it's like, no, this is the sex determining region of the Y chromosome. Well, cool, thanks. That makes the SRY protein. And to answer your question, is it a low chance? No, because all of our genetics has evolved to be sensitive to this gene. But that gene will also has been seen to translocate. So maybe it's not going to be on the Y chromosome, maybe it's going to be on the X chromosome contributed by the father. It's also been seen to translocate. So this is move to one of the allosomes. And so that's in chromosome pairs 1 through 22. So you can have an XX genotype, that's your individual genetic makeup. You can have an XX genotype, have male reproductive parts. You can have an XY genotype and have female reproductive parts. It is a long causal chain. Probabilistically, you'd think it would be 50-50 if biochemistry was highly predictable, but it's not. Neither is genetics. The actual proportions I think it's 51.2% female and 48.8% male. And you go, well, it's not that different. But think about that across 8 billion people on the planet. 1.2% of that probability is quite a few people. I can't even do it in my head. I don't know, what is that? 1% of 8 billion? It's a lot. 80 million?
Something like that.
It's a lot. So genetics is very messy. It's very imprecise, and that's, I think, really the biggest point there. When we want to equate sex and gender, we can't even equate sex completely crisply with genetics. So the idea of sex and gender have been well defined by biology. We just don't use those in our daily understanding of sex and gender.
There's okay, there's a few different directions we could go after this. But I think since we're in genetics and eye color, 16 genes for eye color, according to my buddy Chad Gupta. And if somebody is a geneticist and has a more accurate answer, I'd love to see the comment on there. But if we go in that order of magnitude, this is a whole order of magnitude with the number of genes that affect sex. You mentioned the number 1200. What was it? Is it 1200 for what exactly?
So if we assume that sex is a dimorphic, um, sorry, I'm not coming up with a word. Good on me, the analytical chemist. Can't remember how to say the distribution, but if we assume that sex is a binary, that was much easier. If we assume it's a binary, there are more than 1,200 characteristics, genetic characteristics, that have been identified that lie outside the binary. If you assume that males should have certain genetic characteristics and we observe them in females, that's considered an intersex characteristic. And so that's 1,200
So what you're
modifications.
saying is some of the male stuff bleeds into the female stuff, and some of the female stuff bleeds into the male stuff.
Yes, yes.
So is this the right time to talk about the spectrum?
Certainly, because if you look at biochemistry, the X chromosome and the Y chromosome, so that pair right there, that's pair 23, that is the only one that differs between male and female bodies. Chromosome pairs 1 through 22, I did a video about this recently, but chromosome pairs 1 through 22 are universal, and almost all of the genes that generate primary and secondary sex characteristics are on chromosomes 1 through 22, chromosome pairs 1 through 22. That means you have all the same all the same genes necessary to create female reproductive parts. So that's why we can have intersex characteristics. It's because the human genome carries with it all of the information to make every body, essentially. So
I'm aware of some, I'm going to call it anomalies, because that's what I used to call them, and you're going to
mm,
have to educate me and everybody
mm,
else on this. But where there's uh, a condition where you are born with both a penis and a
yes,
vagina, and then you talk about your story where, you know, the doctor looked at your reproductive part and said, "Oh, guy, M,"
yeah,
right?
right,
What do they do when they've got both? Do they put M/F and decide? And if they do that for this one person, considering that what we're saying now is that while you may be presenting and have developed fully functional one set, there's actually tons of genes and tons of possibilities for the other characteristics that make a man or woman, like
right,
voice, like interests, like
right,
body size, like heart rate, like brain, and all of those can bleed and spectrumize. And so when
yes,
you have that, and you're talking about your story of, okay, making that decision of your sex, and we could talk about the difference between that and gender later. But it's yeah, to me, why why be so clear, and why is it so easy in one situation to make a decision? Why is it so complicated to make a decision? Why not make the decision take time, be part of a process that takes maybe a few years?
mm. I think that would be an excellent idea for what it's worth. I have a somewhat philosophical thought on why this has occurred. Somewhere when we started looking understanding genetics and biochemistry, and especially as pharmaceuticals being able to manipulate biochemistry, including neurochemistry for that matter, when we started being able to manipulate those things, we started caring more about why we are the way we are, as opposed to caring about who we are. And so we want to make these characterizations. We want to make little boxes. I said earlier, I don't believe that science is about putting things in boxes. It's not about facts. It's not, are you male? Are you female? It's about understanding the whole picture. And this is partly why I think that my background has worked well to think about this, because a human is a whole human. A human is not a penis. A human is not a vagina. It's not both. It's not any combination of genitalia. A human has 20,000 genes. 1,200 of them, went in a spectrum. There's other biochemical pathways, many of which are affected by hormonal balance of testosterone and estrogen. So that's my philosophical idea that we want to stick things into boxes. Because when you think about it, what real good did it do me to have an M on a birth certificate? I mean, did
I'm
it?
sure it did some good things. You're talking
I
about the
mean,
whole human and 20,000 genes. Some of it worked. Some of it was you.
it did.
The M
Well,
represented at least parts of you.
oh, it did. And the M said that at some point there was a probability that I would be able to create sperm. And that's about all an M means. And it was true because we did have a child. And so clearly that was accurate. But for the rest of my life, like, did it really contribute to anything? I mean, it allowed my school to tell me, okay, go into these bathrooms, don't go into these bathrooms. We have glass ceilings now for women. I'm going to be a touch maybe controversial, but what else does this do for us? Because you mentioned brain, you mentioned, you know, so many other capabilities of the human experience, and we're going to boil it down to one letter? it seems foolish and think it's a false sense of scientificity. I'm coining a word. We think that
Your
that
word
sounds
sounds better than
scientific.
mine. Yeah. Um, what was okay, well, you just blew past the next two or three questions that I had in mind we could go through, and this is good. I think we can go straight now into the parenting experience.
Mm,
So we've, basically taken two concepts that for, you know, we had a discussion about, I thought I was going to say an ancient concept of binary genders, but that even historically, there's tons of evidence pointing at the fact that they were a lot more fluid and a lot more
yes.
understanding in the past than we are today. But so let's talk about we got a parent today, and our audience mostly have got children with neurological conditions.
Mm,
So I want to be very sensitive to the burden they already have to be as good a parent, and they probably feel inadequate in their lack of understanding of how, the brain works and how they can support their child's development in an environment that feels harsh to them. And now we're adding this new thing on this, like, hey, by the way, when you look at the gender and sex of your child, take your time. What's a baby step in a direction, because you mentioned earlier, let's talk about the whole human experience. Let's not even worry about what is, below the belt. So you're like kind of you go blew past that issue and transcend. You live in this world where humans are just humans. Most of us, including myself, are still in this world of I need concrete stuff to anchor my life on because everything is
sure.
just so shifty. So how do we make it what's your experience with people trying to transition their perspective? What's a good now we've given them the direction, what's a good step in that
Hmm.
direction?
It's a great question, and I want to follow on actually something that you said. It's a good question. You had said it seems overwhelming. I don't think you used that word. It seems overwhelming that I'm thinking about the human experience. But bear in mind, I'm a scientist, right? I mean, my research was based on facts, ultimately facts. I'm saying that the process of science has to do with taking a more holistic view of things. And honestly, I find that liberating because I don't believe that any of us should be a label that we, or at the very least that every label describes us imperfectly. And if you were going to take that first step, the baby step that you're hoping for here, it's really just to realize that everything that's occurring to you, to your children, like none of this has to do with anybody's fault. A lot of this is a semi-random distribution of genetics, and that defines some biochemistry. But as far as like a real, I mean, you would hope for something tangible. What's a step to take?
Yes.
Honestly, I think the best thing I can say is just to recognize, each of us is really truly unique. And I know that's, I mean, I got that
I
in when
think
I was in kindergarten, right? But
our parents who have children with neurological condition, neurodivergent
yeah,
conditions, are actually more prepared to think more holistically about their
I
human
believe it.
being that they care for
Yeah,
as an individual person. Uh, now that I think of it, so actually, all of us parents are ahead of the game. It's those who live in their comfortable bubble of what that society has created for them that don't have to worry about challenging anything or think twice about
yeah,
the nomenclature and the arbitrary decisions that people have made. It's those who
right.
are on the fringe, and I think parents of children with neurological conditions are definitely on the fringe. So they're prepared. So maybe that baby step is already taken. So what's the next step after that?
What I love is really just experiencing. I mean, science is about observation ultimately. I mean, you do want to develop theories, but you only develop theories through observation. And, one of the things that I'm going to use my story here. When I started gender transition, so this was 2022 in July, when I started that, I began by getting some hormone therapy. And I had these significant cognitive changes. And, I like using that phrase because people go, what does that mean? All of a sudden, I started feeling emotions. And I know maybe you're going, no, but Amy, a lot like everybody feels emotions. Good job. No, I didn't. What I felt was anger, and that was about it. And relatively quickly, when I started hormone therapy, what I believe I did was affirm the person I am. And as a result, I started opening up to a greater human experience. I had never really felt joy. I'd never really experienced love. At 52 years old, I mean, that's a bummer. So I started observing these and realizing, you know, the everything I knew, I guess I will say, up until 52 years old, was at the very least colored by somebody else's expectations. And it's a very, I think it's really important for us to distinguish between somebody else's expectations and who we know we are. And if you know you are a person who does whatever, and I don't even care what it is, you like fairies, you want to eat broccoli, it doesn't make a difference to me. Honor that. Honor who you are. And there is clinical research, by the way. There was an existential psychologist in the 1960s. Rollo May is the guy's name. You can look him up if you want. He wrote a book called Love and Will. And in that book describes some of his clinical research that as we look inside, first of all, and learn to love the person we are, not only does that make our lives better, it makes the whole world better. You become more accepting of other people because you recognize we're not defined by something as simple as a chromosome pair. We're not defined by something as simple as genitalia. We're not defined by a label of neurodivergent. Each of us has a very unique set of gifts to bring to the world. And some of these I know don't feel like gifts. I know that all the challenges I faced in 52 years, well, 54 at this point, because it's not like all my challenges went away when I transitioned gender. I know that not all of those challenges felt like gifts. They didn't feel fun. And I don't know. Now I have the rest of my life to look forward to and recognize that all the pain that I went through will hopefully help somebody else on the road. Hopefully this is one step in it. And that will be the step that I'm going to tell you.
I love it. I love it. What a beautiful way to, I think, end our episode together in our session. Thank you for being so clear and I love the stories and the analogies. I think we did some good today.
Good, I hope so. That's my purpose. That's my purpose now. Yours too. So thank you, Kim, for everything you do.
All right. Time to say goodbye. Everybody, see you guys next week.
Bye.